March 14, 1887, when Emma Crawford and her two starving children dragged a blood-soaked stranger from the desert into their crumbling shack. They had no idea they were saving the most dangerous man in Arizona. But would this dying cowboy become their salvation or destroy what little they had left? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. March 14, 1887, when Emma Crawford and her two starving children dragged a blood-soaked stranger from the desert into their crumbling shack. They had no idea they were saving the most dangerous man in Arizona. But would this dying cowboy become their salvation or destroy what little they had left? The sun beat down mercilessly on the Crawford homestead, turning the parched earth into a cracked wasteland that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Emma Crawford stood at her kitchen window, watching dust devils dance across what used to be fertile grazing land. Her calloused hands gripped the edge of the wooden counter, knuckles white with tension. She couldn't afford to show her children 3 years. That's how long it had been since Thomas Crawford rode out one morning to check the fences and never came back. They found his horse 2 days later, saddle empty, reins trailing in the dirt. Nobody, no answers. Just the suffocating silence of the desert and a widow left with 2 children. A failing ranch and debts that grew like tumbleweeds. "Mama, there's nothing left but flour and a bit of salt pork," 12-year-old Sarah announced from the pantry, her voice carrying that peculiar flatness children develop when hunger becomes routine rather than emergency. Emma didn't turn around. She couldn't let Sarah see the despair that threatened to crack through her carefully maintained facade. "We'll make it work, sweetheart. We always do." But they both knew the truth. The bank had sent another letter yesterday, the 3rd one this month. Mr. Garrison, with his expensive suits and cold eyes, had made the situation crystal clear during his last visit. One more missed payment, and the Crawford ranch would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Emma had until the end of the month. 12 days, Mama. 8-year-old Jacob burst through the back door, his face flushed and eyes wild with something between fear and excitement. "There's a man out by the dry creek bed. He's hurt real bad." Emma's heart lurched. Strangers in these parts meant trouble more often than not. Outlaws fleeing from the law, drifters looking for easy pickings, sometimes worse. But the urgency in Jacob's voice spoke of genuine distress, not danger. "Show me," she said, grabbing her late husband's rifle from above the doorframe, more for comfort than protection. Since she'd sold most of the ammunition months ago to buy winter coats for the children, Jacob led her across the dusty yard, past the listing barn where 3 skeletal horses stood in whatever shade they could find, toward the dried-up creek that marked the eastern boundary of their property. Sarah followed close behind, her thin frame casting almost no shadow in the brutal afternoon light. They found him sprawled face down in the dirt. One arm stretched toward the distant mountains, as if he'd been crawling in that direction when his strength finally gave out. His clothes were torn and stained dark with fresh blood. Emma noted with growing alarm, which meant he hadn't been lying here long. A battered Stetson lay a few feet away, crown crushed, coated in dust. "Lord have mercy," Emma whispered, kneeling beside the stranger. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse. They're faint and thready, but present. "He was alive, barely. Is he dead, Mama?" Jacob asked, his voice small and frightened. "Not yet," Emma replied, her mind already calculating the impossible mathematics of survival. They had no doctor within 30 miles. No medicine. Barely any food. Taking in this stranger could mean the difference between her children eating or going hungry. It could attract unwanted attention from whoever had hurt him. It could be the stupidest decision she'd ever made, but Emma Crawford hadn't survived 3 years of widowhood by abandoning her principles when things got hard. Her mother had raised her with a simple rule: You help people when they need helping, and you trust God to sort out the rest. Sarah, run back to the house and heat up every drop of water we've got. Jacob, help me turn him over. Together, she and her son carefully rolled the man onto his back. Emma sucked in a sharp breath. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35 at most, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent under the merciless sun. A dark beard covered his jaw, and a nasty gash ran from his temple down to his cheekbone, the blood already drying in the heat. But it was the wound in his side that worried her most, a dark stain spreading across his shirt, the fabric torn and matted. Gunshot, Emma murmured, recognizing the telltale signs. She'd seen enough injuries during her years on the frontier to know the difference between a knife wound and a bullet hole. The man's eyes fluttered, open for just a moment startlingly, blue against his sun-darkened skin, and his lips moved soundlessly. Then his eyes rolled back and he was unconscious again. Jacob grabbed his shoulders. We need to get him inside before he dies of heat stroke. On top of everything else, dragging a fully grown man across 100 yards of uneven ground while the sun tried to bake them all into the dust proved to be one of the hardest things Emma had ever done. By the time they wrestled him through the door and onto the old sofa in what passed for their living room, all three of them were drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. Sarah had 3 pots of water heating on the stove. Bless her practical heart. Emma sent Jacob to fetch clean rags, the cleanest they had anyway, while she carefully began cutting away the stranger's shirt to assess the damage. The bullet had entered just below his ribcage on the right side, and from what Emma could tell with her limited medical knowledge, it had passed clean through. That was good. It meant she wouldn't have to go digging around inside him with a knife heated over a flame, trying to extract lead while he screamed. But the exit wound was ugly, and he'd lost a dangerous amount of blood. She worked quickly, cleaning the wounds with hot water and what little soap they had left, then packing them with strips of cloth torn from one of her old dresses. The man remained unconscious throughout, which Emma considered a mercy. She'd helped deliver calves and sew up injuries on ranch hands back when Thomas was alive, but she'd never attempted anything like this alone. Will he die? Sarah asked quietly, standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. Emma tied off the last bandage and sat back on her heels, exhausted. I don't know, honey. He's lost a lot of blood, and there's always a chance the wounds could fester. All we can do is keep him clean and cool, and pray. We should turn him in, Sarah said, her voice harder than any 12-year-old should be. He's been shot. That means he's either a criminal or he's got criminals after him. Either way, he's trouble we can't afford. Emma looked at her daughter, this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd learned to calculate risk and reward like a bank clerk instead of dreaming like a little girl should. It broke her heart. Maybe you're right, Emma admitted. You're probably right. But he's lying on our sofa bleeding and helpless, and I won't turn my back on someone in need just because it's inconvenient or dangerous. That's not who we are, Sarah. That's not who your father would want us to be. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Yes, ma'am. The stranger, whoever he was, remained unconscious for the rest of that day and all through the night. Emma dozed in the rocking chair beside the sofa, startling awake every hour to check his breathing and change his bandages. Fever set in after midnight, as she'd feared it would, and she spent the dark hours sponging his forehead with cool water and praying the infection wouldn't kill him before dawn. He was delirious, muttering fragments of sentences that made no sense. Names she didn't recognize, numbers, once clearly, they're coming. Have to warn them. His hand would clench and unclench, reaching for something that wasn't there, probably the gun he'd been wearing, now tucked safely away in Emma's bedroom closet, along with the few personal effects they'd found in his pockets. A worn leather wallet containing exactly $3.20. a pocket watch that had stopped at 3:47, a folded piece of paper with what looked like a property deed. By the time gray dawn light filtered through the windows, the stranger's fever had broken. Emma, exhausted beyond measure, had just closed her eyes for what she promised herself would be only a moment when a rough, parched voice jerked her back to alertness. "Where am I?" Emma's eyes snapped open. The stranger was awake, those startling blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how vulnerable she was, alone in a room with a wounded man who might be anyone. Might have done anything. "You're on the Crawford Ranch, about 40 miles east of Prescott," Emma said, keeping her voice steady and her hand near the rifle leaning against the wall. "My son found you yesterday afternoon, shot and near death. We brought you inside." The man tried to sit up, then gasped and fell back against the cushions, his face going white. "How long?" "About 18 hours. You've been fevered most of the night." Emma poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup and held it to his lips. "Drink slowly." He drank gratefully, then lay back, breathing hard from even that small exertion. "You should have left me out there." "Probably," Emma agreed. "But I didn't. So now you're here, bleeding on my furniture. And I think I've earned the right to know who you are and who might come looking for you." The stranger studied her for a long moment, and Emma got the impression he was measuring her, deciding how much truth she could handle. Finally he said, "Name's Cole Mackenzie. And ma'am, if I could walk out of here right now, I would. Because you and your children are in more danger with me here than you've probably ever been in your lives." Emma's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Why? What did you do?" "It's not what I did," Cole Mackenzie said, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "It's what I know. And there are men who'll burn this place to the ground to make sure that knowledge dies with me." Before Emma could respond, before she could demand details or order this stranger out of her home despite his injuries, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the ranch yard. Multiple horses. Moving fast. Cole's eyes went wide with something that looked like panic. "They found me." "God help you, ma'am. They found me." Emma moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see out. 5 men on horseback were approaching the house, and even from a distance, she could tell they weren't friendly visitors. They rode like men who expected trouble and were prepared to cause more. Her hand tightened on the rifle. Whatever she'd gotten herself into by saving Cole Mackenzie, there was no backing out now. For better or worse, the Crawford family's fate had just become tangled with this stranger's secrets, and something told Emma that before this was over, everything she thought she knew about her quiet, desperate life was about to change forever. Emma's mind raced as the riders drew closer, dust billowing behind their horses like smoke signals announcing trouble. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached the house, 2 minutes to decide whether to hand over the wounded stranger or stand her ground. "Sarah, take Jacob to the cellar," Emma commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the rising panic. "Don't come up no matter what you hear. Understand?" Sarah's eyes were wide, but she nodded and grabbed her younger brother's hand, pulling him toward the kitchen where the cellar door lay hidden beneath a worn rug. Jacob started to protest, but one look at his mother's face silenced him. "You can't fight them alone," Cole said from the sofa, struggling to push himself upright despite the fresh blood seeping through his bandages. "They're Dalton's men. They don't leave witnesses." "Then lie still and shut up," Emma hissed, positioning herself by the window with the rifle. "If they think you're already dead, maybe they'll leave without burning us out." Cole opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, recognizing the steel in her voice. He eased himself back down and closed his eyes, trying to look as corpse-like as possible. The riders pulled up in front of the house in a shower of gravel and dust. Emma counted them through the window, 5 men, just as she'd first seen, all armed with the casual confidence of people who'd never been told no. The leader dismounted first, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard and a black duster coat, despite the heat. He wore a badge on his chest that caught the sunlight, a lawman. That should have been reassuring, but the way his hand rested on his gun belt suggested otherwise. Emma took a deep breath, checked that her rifle was visible but not pointed directly at anyone, and opened the front door before they could knock. Sometimes the best defense was acting like you had nothing to hide. "Afternoon, gentlemen," she said, keeping her voice level and her posture straight. "Can I help you with something?" The bearded man tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am. Deputy Marshal Raymond Fletcher. We're tracking a dangerous fugitive man by the name of Cole Mackenzie. Armed and extremely dangerous. You seen anyone matching that description pass through here?" Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to meet Fletcher's gaze without flinching. "Just me and my children here, Marshal. Haven't seen any riders since the supply wagon came through 3 days back." Fletcher's eyes narrowed slightly, and he gestured to the men behind him. "You won't mind if we take a look around then? Make sure this Mackenzie fellow isn't hiding in your barn or shed." It wasn't a question. "I do mind, actually," Emma said, tightening her grip on the rifle. "This is private property, and I've got work to do. If you've got a warrant, I'll happily cooperate. If not, I'll thank you for moving along." One of the other men, a younger fellow with mean eyes and a scar across his nose, snorted. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that. But we don't need permission from some dirt-poor widow to do our jobs." Fletcher held up a hand, silencing his companion, but his smile had gone cold. "Now, ma'am, there's no need for hostility. We're just trying to protect decent folks like yourself from a very bad man. Cole Mackenzie robbed the Territorial Bank in Prescott 2 days ago, killed 3 people including a woman and her child. You really want to protect someone like that?" Emma's blood ran cold. A murderer? A bank robber? She'd saved a killer and brought him into her home with her children. But something in Fletcher's delivery rang false, too smooth, too practiced, like he'd told this story many times and perfected it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "If he's as dangerous as you say, then I definitely haven't seen him," Emma replied. "A widow with 2 young children would have to be crazy to shelter someone like that, wouldn't she?" Fletcher studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Behind him, the other men shifted restlessly in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring about to snap. "Crazy or foolish?" Fletcher finally said. "You sure about not seeing anyone? Because I'd hate to find out later you were lying to a federal officer. That carries consequences, ma'am." "Serious consequences, I'm sure." Fletcher's jaw tightened. He glanced at the ramshackle barn, the empty corral, the obvious signs of poverty and struggle that marked every inch of the Crawford property. Then his gaze returned to Emma, calculating. "Boys," he said without turning around, "check the barn and the outbuildings. If you find anything or anyone, bring them to me. Alive if possible." Emma's stomach dropped as 3 of the men dismounted and began fanning out across the property. She couldn't stop them, not without starting a fight she'd definitely lose. All she could do was stand there, maintaining her facade of innocent cooperation while praying Cole stayed unconscious and quiet inside. Fletcher remained on the porch, too close for comfort, studying Emma with the intensity of a snake watching the mouse hole. "You got a husband, ma'am?" "Widowed. 3 years now. That's a hard country for a woman alone. Surprised you're still holding on." His tone suggested it wasn't a compliment. "Most folks in your situation would have given up, moved back east where life's easier. Most folks aren't me." "No," Fletcher agreed. "Most folks also don't make stupid decisions that get them killed." You strike me as smarter than that, Mrs. Crawford. Emma Crawford, Mrs. Crawford. Fletcher pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and held it out. This here's a warrant for Cole Mackenzie's arrest, signed by a federal judge. He's wanted for robbery, murder, and treason against the United States government. There's a reward $500 for information leading to his capture. That's a lot of money for a woman in your circumstances. $500. Emma's mind reeled. That was more money than she'd see in 5 years of scraping by. That was the mortgage paid off with enough left over to buy feed for the animals, supplies for the winter, maybe even a new dress for Sarah, who'd been wearing hand-me-downs and patches for years. All she had to do was point to the sofa. Inside, where a wounded stranger lay helpless, Fletcher must have seen something shift in her expression because his smile widened. I can see you're thinking about it. That's good. That's smart. A woman's got to look after her own first, especially when she's got children to feed. Nobody'd blame you for taking that reward. From inside the house, Emma heard the faintest creak of floorboards, so slight that anyone else might have missed it. Cole, shifting position or maybe trying to hide better. Fletcher's eyes flicked toward the door. Something you want to tell me, Mrs. Crawford? Emma's mind raced through her options, each one worse than the last. If she gave up Cole, she'd have the reward money, but she'd also have blood on her hands, and she still didn't know if Fletcher's story was true. If she kept lying and they found Cole anyway. Fletcher had already made clear what happened to people who obstructed federal officers, but there was a third option forming in her mind. Risky and probably insane, but it was the only play she had left. Actually, Marshal, Emma said slowly, now that you mention it, I did see a man earlier this morning, just after dawn. He was riding east toward the canyon country, moving fast like he was being chased. Could have been your fugitive. Fletcher's eyes lit with predatory interest. You're sure about this? Dark hair, beard, wearing a brown vest. That match your man? Close enough. How long ago? Emma pretended to think. Maybe 4 hours? He didn't stop, just kept riding hard. Fletcher turned to the men searching the property and whistled sharply. Mount up. She saw him heading east. If he's got a 4-hour head start, we need to move now before he reaches the canyons. The men returned quickly, empty-handed and looking disappointed. Nothing in the barn but some starving horses, boss. Place is clean. Forget it. We've got a fresh lead. Fletcher swung back into his saddle, then looked down at Emma with something that might have been approval or might have been a threat. She couldn't tell which. If you're lying to me, Mrs. Crawford, I'll be back. And I won't be nearly so pleasant. I understand. Fletcher nodded once, then spurred his horse forward. The other riders fell in behind him, and within moments, they were thundering away from the Crawford ranch, heading east toward the maze of canyons and ravines that would take hours to search. Emma stood on the porch until the dust settled, and the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the steps, the rifle clattering beside her as her hand started shaking with delayed reaction. She'd just lied to a federal marshal. She'd obstructed justice. She'd sent armed men on a wild chase that would buy her maybe 6 hours before they realized they'd been fooled and came back angry. Mama? Sarah's voice came from inside, small and frightened. Are they gone? They're gone, baby. Come on up. Her children emerged from the cellar, both pale but unharmed. Jacob ran to Emma and wrapped his arms around her waist while Sarah stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You lied for him, Sarah said. Why? It was a fair question. Emma wasn't sure she had a good answer. Cole groaned from inside the house, and Emma forced herself to stand. She was exhausted, terrified, and had just made a choice that could destroy what little remained of her life. But she'd made it, and now she had to see it through. She found Cole conscious but barely, his face gray with pain. "You shouldn't have done that," he rasped. "Fletcher's not really a marshal. He works for Victor Dalton, and when he figures out you lied, then we'll deal with it when it happens," Emma interrupted. "Right now you're going to tell me exactly what's going on. No more vague warnings about danger. No more mysterious hints. I just threw away my safety and maybe my children's lives for you. The least you can do is explain why." Cole studied her for a long moment, then slowly reached into his boot, a movement that made Emma tense and reach for the rifle before she realized he was pulling out a folded envelope, sealed with red wax. "Victor Dalton owns the Territorial Bank in Prescott," Cole began, his voice weak but steady. "He also owns the railroad company, half the mining operations in Arizona, and most of the politicians. 3 months ago, I was working as his head of security. That's when I discovered he wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was systematically stealing land from homesteaders, small ranchers, anyone who got in the way of his railroad expansion." Emma's heart sank. "You're telling me this involves railroad land grabs?" "Bigger than that. Dalton's been falsifying property records, bribing judges, even having people killed when they wouldn't sell. I started collecting evidence, documenting everything. When he found out," Cole's hand moved to his wounded side. "This wasn't some random shooting, Mrs. Crawford. Dalton sent his men to kill me and destroy the evidence. But I got away barely." He held up the envelope. "This contains copies of property deeds, ledgers, correspondence, everything needed to prove what Dalton's been doing. I was trying to reach the territorial governor in Phoenix when Fletcher's men caught up with me. That story about me robbing a bank and killing people? Complete fiction. Dalton owns Fletcher and half the law enforcement in this territory." Emma took the envelope with trembling hands, barely daring to believe what she was hearing. "And you just happened to collapse on my property?" "Not exactly." Cole's expression turned grim. "I recognized your ranch from the documents. The Crawford homestead is one of the properties Dalton wants. You've got 40 acres with water rights, and you're positioned right where he needs to build his railroad spur. According to his ledgers, he's been waiting for you to default on your mortgage so the bank can seize the land legally." The room seemed to tilt. Emma sat down hard in the rocking chair, her mind spinning. "Mr. Garrison at the bank. He works for Dalton?" "Garrison is Dalton's brother-in-law. The whole thing's been rigged from the start. Mrs. Crawford, they've been denying your loan extensions, raising your interest rates, doing everything they can to force you into foreclosure." Emma thought about every humiliating visit to the bank, every condescending conversation with Garrison, every time she'd felt like no matter how hard she worked, she was drowning in quicksand. It had all been orchestrated. They'd been trying to steal her home. The last thing she had left of Thomas. Rage burned through her exhaustion, hot and purifying. "How many families?" She asked quietly. "How many people has Dalton done this to?" "At least 30 that I could document. More that I suspect. Some of them are dead now, accidents that were never investigated too closely." Emma looked at her children, standing in the doorway watching this conversation unfold. Sarah's face had gone hard with understanding beyond her years. Jacob just looked scared. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. Cole shifted on the sofa, wincing. "You don't do anything. I need maybe another day to heal enough to travel. Then I'll leave, get this evidence to Phoenix, and you go back to your life. With Dalton exposed, the bank can't touch your property. And in the meantime," Emma demanded, "Fletcher's going to figure out I lied. He'll come back, probably with more men. You can barely sit up, much less ride. We're sitting ducks here." "I know," Cole admitted. "I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this." Emma stood up, her decision crystallizing. "Well, you did. And since running isn't an option and giving up will get us all killed anyway, I guess we're going to have to get creative." She turned to her children. Sarah, inventory everything we have that could be used as a weapon or barricade. Jacob, check if any of those horses in the barn can actually carry a rider if we need to run. Move. Both children jumped to obey. Recognizing the tone their mother used when argument was pointless, Cole watched Emma with something like admiration. You're planning to fight. I'm planning to survive, Emma corrected. Same thing I've been doing for 3 years. Only difference is now I know who the real enemy is, and I've got proof that can bring him down. That makes me dangerous, Mr. Mackenzie, and people who underestimate desperate mothers with nothing left to lose tend to regret it. For the first time since regaining consciousness, Cole smiled a real smile that reached his eyes despite the pain. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Mrs. Crawford. Too late for that, Emma replied. You already bled all over my sofa. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. They had maybe 6 hours before Fletcher realized he'd been duped. 6 hours to prepare for whatever came next. Emma Crawford had survived drought, debt, and the death of her husband. She'd raised 2 children in a land that tried to kill you just for waking up in the morning. And she'd be damned if some railroad baron and his hired thugs were going to take the one thing she had left. The Crawford ranch might be small, poor, and falling apart, but it was hers, and she was going to fight for it. The afternoon stretched into evening as Kotu escodi estic into evening as it going to fight for it. Emma transformed her home from a refuge into a fortress. It wasn't much. A poor widow's ranch could never withstand a serious assault, but she'd learned long ago that survival wasn't about having the best resources. It was about using what you had better than your enemy expected. Sarah returned from her inventory with a grim assessment. We've got the rifle, Papa's old revolver with 6 bullets, a shotgun with no ammunition, 3 kitchen knives, an axe, and a pitchfork. The shotgun's useless without shells, Jacob added. His young face creased with worry. He was too young to carry. Emma nodded, her mind already calculating. The shotgun still looks dangerous from a distance. Mounted in the upstairs window where anyone approaching can see it. Sometimes the threat of a weapon is as good as having one. She turned to Cole, who'd managed to prop himself up against the arm of the sofa. His color slightly better after drinking some broth Sarah had heated. What kind of force will Fletcher bring back? Depends on how angry he is, Cole replied, his voice stronger than it had been hours ago. Could be just him and his 5 men. Could be a dozen if he thinks I've got the documents with me and stops to collect reinforcements from Dalton's other operations. He paused, studying Emma's face. You're not trained for this kind of fight. No, Emma agreed. But I've shot rattlesnakes, coyotes, and a mountain lion that tried to get into the chicken coop back when we had chickens. I can point a rifle and pull a trigger. That'll have to be enough. Cole's expression turned serious. Pointing a rifle at an animal is different from pointing it at a man. When it comes down to it, can you actually shoot someone? Because if you hesitate for even a second, Mr. Mackenzie, Emma interrupted, her voice cold as January frost. 3 years ago, a drifter came through here thinking a widow with 2 small children would be easy prey. He broke into our home in the middle of the night with intentions I won't speak of in front of my daughter. I put my husband's revolver against his chest and pulled the trigger without blinking. So yes, I can shoot someone. Especially someone threatening my children. The room fell silent. Even Sarah looked surprised. Emma had never told her children the full story of that night. Only that there'd been an intruder who wouldn't be troubling anyone again. Cole nodded slowly, newfound respect evident in his eyes. Then we might actually have a chance. What's the plan? Sarah asked, proving once again that she'd inherited her mother's practical nature. Emma moved to the window, studying the layout of her property with tactical eyes she'd never had to use before. The house sat on a slight rise, giving them a view of anyone approaching from the main road to the west. To the east lay the dry creek bed where Jacob had found Cole good cover for anyone trying to sneak up from that direction. The barn offered another potential hiding spot for attackers, and the old well between the house and barn created a blind spot they couldn't effectively monitor. "We can't defend every approach," Emma said, thinking aloud. "So we don't try. We set up to make it look like we're defending the house, but actually, we're going to force them to come at us from the direction we want." She turned to her children. "Jacob, I need you to scatter hay and dry brush around the barn's north side, but make it look natural, like it's just old debris that's been there for months. Sarah, gather every glass bottle we've got and fill them with lamp oil. Leave them in the kitchen." "Mama, you're planning to burn the barn," Sarah said, not quite a question. "Only if we have to. But if Fletcher's men try to use it for cover, I want to be able to deny them that advantage." Emma's voice was steady, but inside, her heart ached. That barn had been Thomas's pride. He'd built it himself over 2 summers, every board placed with care. Burning it would feel like destroying one of the last pieces of him she had left, but protecting their children mattered. More than preserving memories, Cole cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. Fletcher isn't just going to ride up and start shooting. He'll try to smoke you out first, threaten you, maybe set a small fire to show he's serious. He needs to know for certain that I'm here and that I have the documents. If he's not sure, he might try negotiation first." "Which buys us time," Emma said. "Or gets you killed slower. Dalton's men don't leave loose ends. Even if you gave me up right now, Fletcher would probably kill all of you anyway. You've seen him, talk to him. You're witnesses." The weight of that truth settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Emma had known it instinctively from the moment Fletcher rode away, but hearing it stated plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. There was no way out of this that didn't involve bloodshed. "Then we make sure we're the ones left standing," Emma said firmly. "Jacob, get that hay scattered. Sarah, bottles, move." As her children scattered to their tasks, Emma sat down across from Cole. "Tell me everything you know about Fletcher. How he thinks, how he fights, any weakness we can exploit." Cole shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "Raymond Fletcher used to be legitimate law marshal down in Texas before he got caught taking bribes. He's smart, patient when he needs to be, and absolutely ruthless. But he's also arrogant. He thinks everyone's either an asset or an obstacle, and he doesn't believe obstacles can actually stop him, only slow him down. So he'll underestimate us." "He'll underestimate you," Cole corrected. "Especially after you folded so easily with that story about seeing me ride east. He'll think you're scared, cooperative, easily controlled. That's your advantage." Emma absorbed this, already forming the outline of a plan. "What about the other men with him?" "Hired guns mostly. Loyal to Dalton's money, but not particularly brave or clever. If things get hot, they'll break easier than Fletcher will. The one to watch is the younger man with the scar calls himself Deuce. He's genuinely dangerous, enjoys the violence. Fletcher uses him when he needs someone badly hurt." "Good to know." Emma stood, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. "I need to check something. Stay here and try not to bleed through those bandages again." She found Sarah in the kitchen, methodically filling bottles with the last of their lamp oil. Her daughter's hands were steady, her face set in concentration, and Emma felt a pang of guilt for dragging a 12-year-old into this nightmare. "Sarah," Emma said gently, "if things go wrong, if it looks like Fletcher's going to win, I need you to take Jacob and run. There's a cave about 2 miles north, past the Joshua tree that's shaped like a hand. Remember it?" Sarah's hands stilled. "Mama, no. Listen to me. If I tell you to run, you run. You take your brother and you hide in that cave until morning. Then you head to the Brennan Ranch and tell them everything. They'll help you get to Phoenix, get those documents to the governor. Promise me, I'm not leaving you, Sarah." Emma gripped her daughter's shoulders, forcing the girl to meet her eyes. "I'm your mother, and I'm telling you that if it comes down to it, your life and Jacob's life matter more than mine. More than anything. You'll run and you'll survive, and you'll make sure Dalton pays for what he's done. That's not a request. That's an order." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Yes, ma'am." Emma pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, breathing in the smell of her hair, memorizing the feel of her thin frame against her chest. Then she released her and went to find Jacob. Her son was in the barn, spreading hay with the careful precision of a child trying very hard to do everything perfectly. He looked up as Emma approached, and she saw the fear in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide. "Am I doing it right?" he asked. "Perfect," Emma assured him, kneeling down to his level. "Jacob, you're being so brave. Your papa would be proud of you." "I miss him," Jacob whispered. "I wish he was here. He'd know what to do." Emma's throat tightened. "I miss him too, baby. Every single day. But you know what? He taught me how to be strong, how to protect what matters. And what matters most in this world is you and your sister. Whatever happens tonight, remember that." She hugged him close, this boy who still smelled like childhood despite everything he'd been forced to witness and endure. Then she stood, straightened her spine, and became the general her family needed. By the time the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in blood-red hues, the Crawford Ranch was as ready as it would ever be. The rifle was loaded and positioned upstairs with a clear sightline to the main approach. The empty shotgun stood propped in the window like a silent threat. Bottles of lamp oil waited in strategic locations with matches nearby. The horses had been moved to the far corral, out of the line of fire. And Emma had hidden Cole's documents in the one place she knew. Fletcher would never think to look inside her late husband's grave marker. In a hollow she'd carved out of the wooden cross years ago to store letters she'd written to Thomas but never sent. Cole had managed to move himself to a chair by the window, the revolver in his lap. He was still weak, still in pain, but his eyes were clear and focused. Emma had seen that look before on her husband's face when he was preparing for a difficult calving or a dangerous storm, the expression of someone who'd accepted what was coming and was ready to face it. "They'll come after dark," Cole said, watching the dying light. "Fletcher will want the cover, the confusion. Makes it easier to claim whatever happens was justified, that we fired first." "Let them come," Emma replied, checking the rifle's action one more time. "We'll be ready." Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Mama, there's something moving out by the eastern approach. Could be animals, but—" Emma moved to the window Sarah indicated. At first, she saw nothing but deepening shadows and the twisted shapes of Joshua trees against the darkening sky. Then there, a flicker of movement that was too deliberate, too controlled to be wildlife. "They're early," Cole said, tensing. "Fletcher must have figured out my trail went cold faster than expected. He's coming back angry. How many?" Emma asked. Sarah, who had the youngest eyes, squinted into the gloom. "I count 4. No, 5, maybe 6. They're spreading out, trying to surround the house." Emma's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. "Jacob, get to the cellar now. Sarah, I need you upstairs with the shotgun. Don't shoot, we don't have shells anyway, but make sure they can see you're armed. Make them think twice about rushing us." "And me?" Cole asked. "You stay alive and keep that gun ready. If anyone makes it inside, you're our last line of defense." As her children moved to their positions, Emma took her place by the front window, rifle barrel resting on the sill. The shadows continued to shift and move, and she realized with growing dread that Sarah's count had been low. There were at least 8 men out there, maybe more. Fletcher had brought reinforcements, A voice called out from the darkness, amplified by the eerie acoustics of the desert evening. "Mrs. Crawford, I know Cole Mackenzie is in there. I know you've been lying to me. Send him out along with whatever documents he stole, and I give you my word you and your children won't be harmed." Emma didn't respond. Words were useless now. Fletcher's promise was worth less than the dust under her feet. "I'm trying to give you a chance here," Fletcher continued, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Be reasonable. Mackenzie's a wanted criminal. You're harboring a fugitive. Hand him over, and we can all walk away from this." Still Emma remained silent, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, her eyes scanning the darkness for targets. "Fine," Fletcher shouted. "Have it your way. Boys, light it up." The first torch arced through the air like a falling star, landing in the hay Jacob had scattered near the barn. Within seconds, flames erupted, illuminating the night and revealing the positions of at least 3 of Fletcher's men. Emma didn't hesitate. She aimed at the nearest figure and fired. The rifle's crack split the night, and one of the silhouettes jerked backward with a cry. She'd hit him, maybe not fatally, but enough to take him out of the fight. Answering gunfire exploded from multiple positions, bullets thudding into the house's wooden walls and shattering windows. Emma ducked back from the window, her heart racing, her ears ringing from the cacophony. The battle for the Crawford ranch had begun. From upstairs, Sarah shouted, 3 more coming from the north side. Cole fired from his position, the revolver's bark adding to the chaos. Glass shattered somewhere in the kitchen. Emma moved to a different window, avoiding the pattern Fletcher's men would expect. She spotted another target silhouetted against the growing barn fire and took aim. The night exploded into violence, smoke and flame. And somewhere in the chaos, Emma Crawford, widow, mother, and now fighter, made a promise to herself and her children. They would survive this, no matter the cost. The war for their home, their lives, and their future had only just begun. The barn fire roared skyward, turning night into hellish daylight and casting dancing shadows across the Crawford property. Emma pressed herself against the wall between 2 windows, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. Splinters exploded from the doorframe where a bullet had just struck, showering her with wooden fragments. "Mama!" Sarah's voice cut through the gunfire from upstairs. 2 men breaking off toward the well. Emma spun to the western window, spotting the figures Sarah had called out. They were using the well's stone structure as cover, trying to flank the house. She aimed carefully, leading her target just as Thomas had taught her during target practice years ago, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck stone, sending up sparks and chips that drove the men back into the shadows. Not a kill, but it bought them precious seconds. Cole fired twice from his position, each shot deliberate, despite the pain Emma knew he must be feeling. His military training showed in the economical way he moved, conserving energy and ammunition like a man who'd been in firefights before. "How many rounds do you have left?" Emma called to him. 3, Cole replied grimly. "After that, I'm down to harsh language." Despite everything, Emma almost smiled. Even wounded and outnumbered, the man maintained his composure. The gunfire suddenly ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of burning wood. Emma's ears rang in the absence of sound, and she realized Fletcher was regrouping, reassessing. She'd wounded at least 1 of his men, maybe 2. That would make him cautious, force him to reconsider his approach. "Mrs. Crawford!" Fletcher's voice boomed from somewhere beyond the firelight. "You're only making this harder on yourself. We've got you surrounded. There's no way out." Emma reloaded the rifle with practiced movements, her hands steady. She'd been rationing bullets since Thomas died, making every shot count during hunts. She had maybe 15 rounds left, not nearly enough if this turned into a prolonged siege. "I've got a proposition," Fletcher continued. "You send out Mackenzie and the documents. and I'll let you and your children ride out of here. You can take your horses, whatever supplies you can carry. Start fresh somewhere else." "He's lying," Cole said quietly. "The moment you step outside—" "I know," Emma interrupted. She moved to a different window, refusing to stay in one position long enough to become an easy target. "I'm not negotiating with a man who murders homesteaders for railroad money." Her words carried through the broken windows, and she heard Fletcher's sharp intake of breath even from a distance. Good. Let him know she understood exactly who and what he was. "Mackenzie told you, did he?" Fletcher's tone had shifted, losing its false reasonableness. "Then you know too much." "That's unfortunate, Mrs. Crawford. I was hoping to avoid killing a woman and her children. But you're not leaving me much choice." "There's always a choice." "Marshal," Emma shot back, deliberately using his fake title with sarcasm. "You could choose to stop working for a criminal. You could choose to do the right thing for once in your miserable life. But we both know you won't, because men like you don't have principles, you have prices." The rage in Fletcher's voice when he responded confirmed Emma had struck a nerve. "Burn them out. I want that house reduced to ash with everyone inside it." Torches bloomed in the darkness like deadly flowers. Emma's stomach dropped as she counted them, 6, 7, 8 flames arcing toward the house from multiple directions. "Sarah, get down here now." Emma screamed. "Jacob, stay in the cellar no matter what." Sarah thundered down the stairs as the first torch crashed through an upstairs window, landing in what used to be Emma's bedroom. Another smashed through the kitchen window. A third bounced off the roof but caught in the dry wood shingles. "The bottles," Emma commanded. "We need to create a fire break." Sarah grabbed 2 of the oil-filled bottles, understanding immediately what her mother intended. While fire consumed one part of the house, they'd use controlled burns to create barriers the flames couldn't easily cross. It was desperate, dangerous, and probably futile, but it was all they had. Emma snatched up a bottle herself, lit the cloth wick, and hurled it through the window toward the advancing men. The bottle shattered against the ground, erupting in flames that formed a wall of fire between the house and Fletcher's position. 2 more bottles followed, creating a semicircular barrier of burning oil. The heat was becoming unbearable. Smoke filled the house, making breathing difficult and visibility nearly impossible. Emma could hear the fire spreading through the upper floor, consuming 3 years of memories in hungry gulps. "We can't stay here much longer," Cole shouted over the roar of flames. He'd managed to stand, leaning heavily against the wall, revolver still gripped in his hand. Emma knew he was right. The house was becoming a death trap. But outside, Fletcher's men waited to cut them down the moment they emerged. It was a choice between burning alive or being shot, neither option acceptable. Then an idea struck her with the force of revelation. "The cellar," Emma said urgently. "There's a root tunnel Thomas dug runs about 50 yards north and comes up near the tree line. He built it for storage, keeping vegetables cool during summer. It's narrow, but we can fit." "Why didn't you mention this before?" Cole asked. "Because I wasn't sure it was still clear. Haven't used it since Thomas died. Could be collapsed, could be full of snakes or rats. But it's our only chance." Sarah was already moving toward the cellar door. "Better than burning." They found Jacob huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror but tears held back through sheer force of will. Emma's heart broke and swelled with pride simultaneously at her son's courage. "We're leaving, baby," Emma said, pulling him close. "Through the tunnel. Sarah will go first with a lamp, then you, then Mr. Mackenzie, then me. We move fast and quiet. Understand?" Jacob nodded, not trusting his voice. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the cellar. Thomas's paranoia about Indian raids had seemed excessive at the time. But now Emma silently thanked him for his caution. Sarah pried away the boards with the claw hammer, revealing a dark opening barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Above them, the house groaned as fire ate through support beams. They had minutes at most before the entire structure collapsed. "Go!" Emma urged. Sarah disappeared into the darkness, lamp held high. Jacob followed, his small frame vanishing into the earth. Cole moved next, gasping with pain as he squeezed his wounded body through the narrow passage. Emma cast one last look at the cellar, at the preserved jars she'd spent summer days filling, at Thomas's tools hanging on the wall, at the last physical remnants of the life she'd built here. Then she entered the tunnel and pulled the false wall closed behind her, plunging herself into claustrophobic darkness, lit only by Sarah's distant lamp. The tunnel was exactly as Emma remembered: low, narrow, suffocating. She crawled on hands and knees through dirt that smelled of decay and ancient moisture, her rifle slung across her back, every breath full of dust and fear. Ahead, she could hear Cole's labored breathing, Jacob's whimpers, Sarah's murmured encouragement. The earth pressed down around her like a grave. And for one horrible moment, Emma wondered if they'd simply traded one death for another, buried alive instead of burned. But then fresh air touched her face, carrying the scent of sage and desert night. And she knew they'd made it. They emerged near a stand of Joshua trees, covered in dirt and ash, coughing and gasping but alive. Behind them, the Crawford house was fully engulfed, flames shooting 50 feet into the air. Emma could see Fletcher's men silhouetted against the inferno, weapons drawn, waiting for their victims to flee the fire. They had no idea their prey had already escaped. "We need to move," Cole rasped. "They'll figure it out soon enough." "Where?" Sarah asked. "We've got no horses, no supplies, nowhere to go." Emma looked at her children, filthy, terrified, but unbroken. She looked at Cole, wounded and weakening but determined. She looked at the fire consuming everything she'd worked for, everything Thomas had built, and she made her decision. "The Brennan Ranch," Emma said. "It's 8 miles northeast. Walt Brennan owes me a favor. I helped deliver his son 3 years back when the doctor couldn't make it through a storm. He'll give us shelter, horses, whatever we need. Can you make 8 miles? Cole asked Jacob gently. The boy straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir." "Then we move. Stay low, stay quiet, and if I say run, you run and don't look back." They set off into the darkness, moving away from the burning house toward the rocky terrain that would hide their tracks. Emma led, using stars and memory to navigate. Cole brought up the rear despite his injuries, constantly scanning behind them for pursuit. They'd been walking maybe 20 minutes when Sarah suddenly grabbed Emma's arm. "Mama, stop, listen." Emma froze. At first, she heard nothing but wind and the distant crackle of fire. Then horses. Multiple horses, moving fast, heading their direction. "They found the tunnel," Cole said grimly. "Fletcher's coming." Emma's mind raced. They were exposed, exhausted, nearly out of ammunition. Cole could barely walk, let alone run. Jacob's short legs couldn't maintain the pace they'd need to escape mounted pursuers. But about 100 yards ahead, Emma spotted something that might save them, a cluster of large boulders creating a natural fortress. It wasn't much, but it was defensible terrain with multiple escape routes if things went south. "There," she pointed. "We ford up, make our stand." "We can't fight them all," Sarah protested. "No," Emma agreed. "But we can slow them down, make them pay for every inch. And if we're lucky, Walt Brennan might hear the gunfire and come investigate." It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. They reached the boulders just as the riders came into view. 5 men, Fletcher in the lead, his face a mask of fury illuminated by the torch one of his men carried. "Take positions," Emma commanded, her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her insides. "Sarah, you're with Jacob behind the large rock. Cole, can you shoot?" "I can shoot," Cole confirmed, checking his revolver. 3 rounds, 3 targets. "Make them count." Emma positioned herself behind a boulder, that offered a clear view of the approaching riders while providing solid cover. She chambered around, aimed carefully, and waited. Fletcher reined in about 30 yards away, clearly visible in the torchlight. "End of the line, Mrs. Crawford. You've got nowhere left to run. Come out now, and I promise it'll be quick." Emma's finger tightened on the trigger. She could end this right now. One shot, Fletcher dead, his men scattered. But killing a man, even one who deserved it, even in self-defense, was a line she'd only crossed once before. And that wait still sometimes woke her in the night. But then she thought of Jacob's frightened face, Sarah's fierce courage, the life they deserved to live, free from men like Victor Dalton and Raymond Fletcher. She thought of Thomas, and what he would do to protect his family. Emma took a breath, steadied her aim, and fired. The shot rang out like judgment across the desert night. Fletcher's hat flew off his head, the bullet passing so close to his skull that he actually felt its passage. He dove from his horse, screaming orders to his men. All hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Emma worked the rifle's action smoothly, taking careful shots while bullets sparked off the rocks around her. Cole's revolver barked 3 times in rapid succession. 3 shots, 2 men down. One clutching a shattered arm. Sarah threw rocks with surprising accuracy, forcing one attacker to duck at a critical moment and spoiling his aim. Jacob pressed himself against the boulder, eyes squeezed shut, praying silently. Then Emma heard the most beautiful sound she'd ever experienced. More horses, coming fast from the northeast, and voices calling out in alarm. "That's gunfire! Move! Someone's under attack!" Walt Brennan and his ranch hands, drawn by the noise and the glow of the burning Crawford house, arrived like the cavalry in a dime novel. 6 men, all armed, all outraged at finding strangers attacking a neighboring family. Fletcher's remaining men saw the new arrivals and made the calculations that kept criminals alive. The odds had shifted too dramatically. Whatever Dalton was paying them, it wasn't enough to die for. "Retreat!" Fletcher snarled, mounting his horse. "Fall back!" Within seconds, Dalton's men were galloping away into the darkness, leaving their wounded behind, their mission a complete failure. Walt Brennan, a grizzled rancher in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, rode up to the boulders and dismounted quickly. "Emma? Emma Crawford? That you?" "It's me, Walt," Emma said, emerging from cover on shaking legs. "And I've got one hell of a story to tell you." Walt looked at the bedraggled group, the wounded stranger, the soot-covered children, the woman holding a rifle like she knew how to use it. Then he looked back toward the burning house on the horizon. "I expect you do," he said. "Come on, let's get you all somewhere safe, get you fed and cleaned up. Then we'll figure out what's to be done." As Emma helped Cole limp toward Walt's horses, as Sarah and Jacob climbed up behind ranch hands who spoke gentle words of comfort, as the adrenaline finally began to fade and exhaustion rushed in to fill its place, Emma allowed herself one moment of relief. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, with nothing but courage and desperation, they'd survived. But the war wasn't over. Dalton still had power, Fletcher was still alive, and somewhere in the darkness, powerful men were plotting their next move. The Crawford family had won this battle. But the real fight for justice, for their future, for everyone Dalton had wronged, was only just beginning. The Brennan ranch house glowed with lamplight as dawn approached, a beacon of warmth and safety after the nightmare of the previous night. Emma sat at Walt's kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming her hands, watching the eastern horizon slowly brighten from black to deep, purple to the dusty blue of early morning. She'd spent the past 3 hours telling Walt everything, Cole's true identity, Dalton's land scheme, the documents, Fletcher's attack. Walt had listened without interruption, his weathered face growing darker with anger as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "So Dalton's been doing this to families all across the territory," Walt said finally. his voice tight with controlled fury. "And nobody stopped him because he owns the law." "Not all of it," Cole interjected from where he lay on Walt's sofa, freshly bandaged by Walt's wife Martha. "Just enough to make resistance seem futile. That's how men like Dalton operate. They don't need to control everything, just the critical pressure points. A judge here, a marshal there, the right bank officials. Suddenly honest people have no recourse." Walt stood and paced to the window, staring out at his own land. 40 years of backbreaking, work that could be stolen with falsified documents and corrupt officials. "How many ranches has he taken?" "At least 30 that I documented," Cole replied. "But I suspect it's closer to 50 or 60. Some families just disappeared, moved away suddenly, or had accidents. Dalton's been building this empire for almost 5 years. And nobody connected the dots because each case seemed isolated. Until you started digging. Until I couldn't ignore what I was seeing anymore." Cole's voice carried the weight of guilt. "I worked for him for 2 years before I understood what he really was. By then, I'd helped him hurt people. That's on me. That's why I gathered the evidence, trying to make it right." Emma studied Cole's face, seeing the genuine remorse there. He'd been Dalton's enforcer, his head of security, complicit in the machinery of exploitation, even if he hadn't fully understood it. That kind of guilt didn't wash away easily. Martha Brennan appeared from the back rooms where she'd put Sarah and Jacob to bed in her own children's old rooms. "The little ones are finally asleep," she said softly. "Poor things were so exhausted they could barely keep their eyes open." "Thank you, Martha," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't." "Hush now," Martha interrupted gently, placing a weathered hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your family, Emma. You helped bring our Samuel into this world when we thought we might lose him. You think we'd turn our backs when you needed us?" Walt returned to the table, his jaw set with determination. "The question is, what do we do now? Those documents Cole collected are the only proof we've got, and Dalton knows we have them. He's not going to stop until he gets them back, or kills everyone who's seen them." "We take them to Phoenix," Emma said. "Straight to the territorial governor, like Cole originally planned. Get them published in newspapers. Make the evidence so public that Dalton can't suppress it." "Phoenix is 200 miles of hard riding," Walt pointed out. "Fletcher will have men watching every road, every town between here and there. Moment we make a move, they'll know." Cole shifted on the sofa, pain flashing across his face. "Walt's right. And in my condition, I'd slow you down. Fletcher's probably already sent word to Dalton about what happened. By noon today, there'll be wanted posters with all our faces, probably claiming we're murderers, thieves. Whatever story makes us the criminals instead of the victims. So we're trapped," Emma said, frustration building. They'd survive the night only to find themselves in an impossible situation. "Not trapped," Walt corrected. "Just need to be smarter than Dalton expects. He thinks like a businessman. Direct routes, predictable behavior, cost-benefit analysis. So we don't give him what he expects. What are you suggesting?" Cole asked. Walt smiled, a dangerous expression that reminded Emma why he'd survived 40 years in a harsh country. "I'm suggesting we don't run to Phoenix. We bring Phoenix to us." Over the next hour, Walt laid out a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. Emma couldn't quite decide which. Instead of trying to sneak past Dalton's network, they'd use it against him. Walt had connections throughout the territory, fellow ranchers, merchants, even a few honest lawmen who'd resisted Dalton's corruption. They'd send riders in multiple directions, each carrying copies of Cole's documents to different newspapers, different officials, and different power centers. "Dalton can't chase everyone at once," Walt explained. "And even if he stops half the riders, the other half get through. Once this information hits 3 or 4 newspapers simultaneously, it becomes unstoppable. The evidence goes public, and even Dalton's paid politicians won't be able to ignore it." How long will it take to organize this? Cole asked. 2 days, maybe 3. I'll need to send word to the other ranchers, get volunteers willing to risk the ride. But folks around here are fed up with Dalton's schemes. Once they understand what's at stake, they'll line up to help. Emma felt a spark of hope for the first time since finding Cole bleeding in her creek bed. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you and your children stay here where it's safe. My ranch hands are good men, all veterans, all capable. Fletcher tries another attack, he'll find a real fight waiting. Martha nodded firmly. And I'll make sure those babies get proper meals and rest. Lord knows they've been through enough. Emma's throat tightened with gratitude, but before she could speak, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning quiet. Everyone tensed. Was Fletcher back already? Walt moved to the window, hand dropping to his gun. Then his posture relaxed slightly. It's Jeremiah Oaks and Tom Patterson. Must have seen the smoke from your place last night. 2 more ranchers arrived within the hour, then 3 more by mid-morning. News of the attack on the Crawford place had spread through the ranching community like wildfire, and neighbors were arriving to check on Emma and offer help. Each one listened to the full story with growing outrage, and each one volunteered to be part of Walt's plan. By noon, they had 12 riders committed to carrying documents to different destinations. Walt's wife spent the morning making copies of Cole's evidence, her neat handwriting transcribing names, dates, property descriptions, financial records. It was painstaking work, but critical. Each rider would carry identical packages, ensuring the evidence couldn't be lost or destroyed. Emma found Cole alone on the porch later that afternoon, staring toward the east where smoke still rose from the ruins of her home. She sat beside him, and for a moment neither spoke. I'm sorry, Cole said finally. About your house. Your life. Everything you lost because you helped me. That house was already lost, Emma replied. Bank would have taken it in another 2 weeks anyway. At least this way, I'm fighting for something that matters. And maybe, just maybe, we'll stop Dalton from doing to other families what he did to mine. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Crawford. I'm a desperate woman with nothing left to lose. That's different. Cole turned to face her. No, it's not. I've met plenty of desperate people. Most of them fold when things get hard. You didn't. You stood and fought even when the smart move was to give me up and save yourself. That takes character. Emma considered this. My husband used to say that character is what you do when nobody's watching and nothing's at stake. I think that's wrong. Real character is what you do when everyone's watching and everything's at stake. That's when you find out who you really are. Then I hope I measure up, Cole said quietly. Because Dalton's going to come at us with everything he has. This isn't over. I know. But at least now we're not facing him alone. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Riders came and went, carrying messages and supplies. Walt's ranch became a command center for what was essentially a rebellion against Dalton's corrupt empire. Maps were studied, routes planned, contingencies debated. Sarah helped Martha with the copying work, her careful handwriting proving almost as neat as the older woman's. Jacob assisted the ranch hands with chores, gaining confidence under the gentle guidance of men who treated him with respect rather than pity. Emma found herself in an unexpected role. She'd become a symbol to the gathered ranchers. Proof that even the most desperate circumstances could be fought against. Other families shared their own stories of Dalton's exploitation, building a damning picture of systematic abuse. On the 3rd day, everything was ready. 12 riders would leave at dawn, each heading in a different direction: Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, even 2 heading all the way to California, where major newspapers might pick up the story. They'd leave in staggered departures, avoiding patterns Fletcher's men might intercept. That evening, Emma sat with her children in the room Martha had given them. Sarah brushed out her hair while Jacob dozed in the corner, exhausted by honest work and full meals. What happens after? Sarah asked quietly. After the newspapers publish the story and Dalton gets arrested, what do we do then? It was a fair question. The Crawford house was gone, reduced to ash and rubble. Even if they won, even if justice prevailed, they'd be starting from nothing with no clear path forward. I don't know, Emma admitted. Maybe we rebuild the land that's still ours legally. Or maybe we start fresh somewhere else. But we'll figure it out together, as a family. That's what matters. I liked our old house, Jacob mumbled from his corner, not quite asleep after all. Even when we were hungry and scared, it was home. Emma's heart broke a little. I know, baby. But sometimes home isn't a building. It's the people you're with. And we've still got each other. Before Sarah could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Emma, you need to come quick. There's trouble. Emma's stomach dropped. She followed Martha to the main room where Walt stood with one of his ranch hands, a young man named Billy who looked like he'd ridden hard and fast. Tell her what you told me, Walt commanded. Billy swallowed hard. I was in town getting supplies like you asked, Mr. Brennan. Whole place is covered in wanted posters. Got drawings of Mrs. Crawford, Cole Mackenzie, even the children. Says they're murderers, killed 3 of Dalton's men, and burned down their own house to cover the evidence. Reward is $1,000. $1,000. Emma felt the room tilt. That was more money than most people in the territory would see in 10 years. Every bounty hunter, every desperate drifter, every person with more greed than conscience would be looking for them. There's more, Billy continued reluctantly. Sheriff in town is organizing a posse. Says he's got a legal warrant to arrest all of you for murder and arson. They're planning to ride out tomorrow morning, and word is they're heading here first. Cole cursed softly. Dalton's moving faster than we expected. He's using the law itself as a weapon. If a legitimate sheriff arrests us under false charges, we can't fight back without actually becoming criminals. Sheriff Morris has always been straight, Walt said, his voice troubled. If he's got a warrant he believes is legitimate, he'll serve it. He won't care about our side of the story until after we're in custody. And once we're in custody, we'll never make it to trial, Emma said, understanding the trap completely. Dalton will make sure we have an accident before we can testify. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. The plan had been perfect, but it required time they no longer had. The riders wouldn't leave until dawn, and the sheriff's posse would arrive before then. We have to move up the timeline, Cole said, pushing himself upright despite obvious pain. Send the riders now tonight. Forget the staggered departures and coordinated timing. Just get those documents out before the sheriff arrives. It's dark, Walt protested. Traveling at night is dangerous, and not as dangerous as waiting, Emma interrupted. She turned to Walt, her decision made. Send the riders now with whatever copies are finished. I'll stay here and face the sheriff. If he's an honest man like you say, maybe I can convince him to hear our side before making arrests. That's suicide, Cole objected. The moment you're in custody, then I won't let myself be taken into custody, Emma said firmly. I'll stall, I'll talk, I'll do whatever it takes to buy those riders time to get clear. Once the evidence is public, Dalton loses even if we end up in jail. The truth will come out. Walt looked like he wanted to argue, but he recognized the steel in Emma's voice, the same determination that had kept her ranch running for 3 years after her husband's death. The same strength that had faced down Fletcher's attack. Martha, get those riders assembled, he said finally. We move now. The next hour was controlled chaos as riders prepared for immediate departure. Horses were saddled, supplies hastily packed, documents sealed in oilskin to protect them from weather. Emma watched from the porch as each rider departed into the darkness, carrying hope and evidence in their saddlebags. Sarah appeared beside her, having put Jacob back to bed. "You're planning something dangerous." It wasn't a question. "I'm planning to give those riders the time they need," Emma replied. "Whatever that takes. Then I'm staying with you. Jacob's young enough Martha can keep him safe, claims she's protecting him out of kindness. But I'm old enough to make my own choices, and I choose to stand with my mother." Emma wanted to argue, to order her daughter to safety. But she recognized herself in Sarah's expression, the same stubborn courage, the same refusal to back down when principles were at stake. "Your father would be proud of you," Emma said softly. "He'd be proud of both of us." Sarah replied as the last rider disappeared into the night, and the eastern horizon began its slow shift toward dawn. Emma prepared to face whatever was coming. The sheriff's posse would arrive within hours. Fletcher's men were still out there somewhere, hunting them, but 12 riders were carrying the truth in 12 different directions. And that truth would outlive whatever happened in the coming confrontation. Emma Crawford had lost her home, her security, nearly her life. But she hadn't lost her purpose or her courage. And sometimes that was enough to change the world. The final battle was approaching. And this time, Emma intended to win, no matter the cost. Dawn broke over the Brennan Ranch with deceptive, beauty pink and gold light, painting the desert in watercolor hues that belied the tension crackling through the air. Emma stood on the porch with Walt and Cole, watching the horizon for dust clouds that would signal the approaching posse. "They'll come from the south," Walt predicted, studying the landscape with a lifetime's experience. "Morris knows these trails better than anyone. He'll take the direct route from town." "How many men will he bring?" Emma asked. "Standard posse is 6 to 8, plus the sheriff himself. All deputized civilians, shopkeepers, ranch hands, anyone who volunteers. Most of them will be honest men who believe they're doing the right thing." Walt's voice carried the weight of a difficult truth. "That makes them more dangerous than Fletcher's hired guns in some ways. They won't question the warrant, won't hesitate to use force if they think we're resisting legitimate authority." Cole leaned against the porch railing, his color better after 3 days of rest and Martha's cooking, but still visibly weakened. "Our best play is to cooperate initially. Let Morris state his business, present the warrant. That buys time for the riders to get farther from here." "And then what?" Sarah asked from the doorway. She'd insisted on being present for this conversation, despite Emma's attempts to shield her. "We just let them arrest us? Put us in a cell where Dalton can have us killed." "We stall," Emma said. "We ask questions, demand to see evidence, request time to gather our things. Every minute we delay is another mile the riders put between themselves and pursuit." Walt nodded approval. "I'll do most of the talking. Morris and I go back 30 years. He might listen to me when he wouldn't listen to strangers. But Emma, if things go sideways, if it looks like they're going to take you by force, you get Sarah and run. My ranch hands will provide cover." "I won't leave Cole defenseless," Emma protested. "I can take care of myself," Cole interjected. "Or at least, I can cause enough commotion to cover your escape. Mrs. Crawford, you've already lost everything trying to help me. I won't be responsible for you losing your freedom or your life too." Before Emma could argue, Billy called out from his lookout position near the barn. "Dust cloud. South approach, just like you said, Mr. Brennan. Maybe a dozen riders." Emma's heart rate kicked up, but her hands remained steady. She'd faced death 3 days ago when Fletcher's men attacked. A sheriff's posse, even an honest one serving a corrupt warrant, somehow seemed less terrifying than men actively trying to murder her children. "Everyone take your positions," Walt commanded. "Hands visible, weapons holstered. We're law-abiding citizens cooperating with legal authorities. That's the story, and we stick to it." Martha emerged from the house, having finally convinced Jacob to stay hidden in the back room, with 2 of the ranch hands guarding him. She took her place beside Walt, her presence a statement. This family stands together, The riders materialized from the morning haze, moving at a steady pace that suggested confidence rather than urgency. Sheriff Tom Morris led them, a stocky man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and a face weathered by decades of sun and hard decisions. Emma recognized several of the men behind him, the blacksmith from town, a couple of ranch hands from neighboring spreads, even old Cyrus Webb who ran the general store, ordinary men doing what they believed was their civic duty. The posse pulled up 20 yards from the house, maintaining a cautious distance. Morris dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his gun belt in a gesture that was more habit than threat. "Walt," he called out. "Didn't expect to find you mixed up in this." "Morning, Tom," Walt replied, his voice carefully neutral. "What brings you out this way so early?" Morris pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Got a warrant here for the arrest of Emma Crawford, Cole Mackenzie, and 2 minor children, Sarah and Jacob Crawford. Charges include murder, arson, obstruction of justice, and harboring a fugitive. I'm here to serve that warrant and bring them back to town for trial." "That's an interesting piece of fiction," Cole called out from the porch. "Who signed that warrant, Sheriff?" "Let me guess, Judge Harrington?" Morris's jaw tightened. Judge Harrington is a duly appointed territorial judge. His signature makes this warrant legal and binding. Judge Harrington is also Victor Dalton's cousin, Cole continued, which makes that warrant worth less than the paper it's printed on. "I don't know anything about that," Morris said, but Emma detected uncertainty in his voice. "What I know is 3 men are dead, Dalton's men, and the Crawford place burned to the ground with evidence suggesting arson. That warrants investigation at minimum, arrest on probable cause at maximum. I'm just doing my job." Walt stepped forward, hands clearly visible. "Tom, those 3 men weren't murdered. They were killed attacking Mrs. Crawford's home in the middle of the night. That's self-defense, not murder. And the house burned because they set it on fire trying to kill her and her children." "You're being used." "So you say," Morris replied. "But I've got sworn statements from Deputy Marshal Fletcher and 4 witnesses saying otherwise. They claim Mackenzie robbed the Territorial Bank in Prescott, that Mrs. Crawford helped him escape, and that they burned the evidence to cover their tracks." "Fletcher's not a real marshal," Emma said, finally speaking up. "He works for Dalton. All of this, the warrant, the charges, the witnesses, it's fabricated to cover up a land fraud scheme that's been going on for years." Morris's expression suggested he wanted to believe her, but doubt warred with duty on his weathered face. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "You got proof?" "We have documents," Walt said carefully. "Evidence showing Dalton's been systematically stealing homesteads through fraudulent foreclosures and falsified property records. Cole Mackenzie was Dalton's head of security until he discovered what was really going on. That's why Fletcher's been trying to kill him to keep that evidence from reaching the territorial governor." "Show me these documents," Morris demanded. Emma's mind raced. The original documents were safely hidden, and the copies had left with the riders hours ago. Showing Morris anything would mean revealing their location, potentially compromising the entire plan. "The documents are being delivered to proper authorities as we speak," Cole said. "Newspapers, the governor's office, federal marshals, real ones, not Dalton's hired thugs wearing badges. By tomorrow, everyone in the territory will know what Dalton's been doing." Morris's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like you're refusing to cooperate with a legal investigation. That sounds like we're protecting evidence from corrupt officials who destroy it the moment we handed it over," Emma countered. "Sheriff Morris, you've known Walt Brennan for 30 years. Have you ever known him to harbor criminals or lie to the law?" Morris looked at Walt, then back at Emma, clearly struggling with competing loyalties. "No, ma'am, I haven't. Walt's always been straight with me. But that doesn't change the fact that I've got a legal warrant here, signed by a judge, charging you with serious crimes." "A judge in Dalton's pocket," Cole repeated. "Maybe so," Morris acknowledged. But until someone proves that in a court of law, Judge Harrington's authority stands. I'm sorry, Mrs. Crawford, but I'm going to have to insist you come with me. You can tell your side of things to the judge. If what you're saying is true, you'll have your day in court. And if we refuse? Sarah asked, stepping forward despite Emma's attempt to hold her back. Morris's expression softened slightly looking at the young girl. Then I'll have to take you by force, and I really don't want to do that. Especially not with children involved. She's right to refuse, a new voice called out. Emma's heart sank as Raymond Fletcher rode into view from the eastern approach, accompanied by 6 men all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of professional killers. Because the moment you put them in that jail cell, Sheriff, they'll suffer an unfortunate accident. Probably try to escape, get themselves shot. Tragic, really. Morris spun toward Fletcher, his hand dropping to his weapon. Fletcher? What are you doing here? This is my jurisdiction, my arrest. Just providing security, Sheriff, Fletcher said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Dalton wants to make sure these dangerous criminals don't escape justice. We're here to assist. I don't need assistance, Morris said flatly. And I don't recall asking for it. Nonetheless, Fletcher's men spread out, flanking the sheriff's posse. The dynamic had shifted dangerously. What had been a lawful if misguided arrest was now something else entirely. Walt's ranch hands emerged from strategic positions around the property, rifles visible but not yet aimed. The Brennan Ranch suddenly bristled with armed men on multiple sides, all watching each other with the wary tension of powder kegs awaiting a spark. Everyone calm down, Morris ordered, sensing the situation spiraling out of control. Fletcher, you and your men stand down. I'm handling this. With respect, Sheriff, you're not handling it fast enough, Fletcher replied. Dalton wants these people in custody, now. Every minute we waste gives them time to spread their lies and propaganda. You mean spread the truth? Cole called out. Tell me, Fletcher, how many families have you helped Dalton destroy? How many people have died because they got in the way of his railroad expansion? Does it keep you up at night, or have you gotten so good at being a monster that you sleep just fine? Fletcher's face darkened with rage. You're a dead man, Mackenzie. Only question is whether you die in the next 5 minutes or the next 5 hours. Raymond. Morris's voice carried a warning. Stand down. This is still a lawful arrest, and it will be conducted according to procedure. No one gets shot unless they resist with violence. Sheriff Morris, Emma said, her voice cutting through the tension. Look around. Really look. You've got 10 honest men with you, neighbors, friends, people you've known for years. Fletcher's got professional killers. If shooting starts, how many of your men die first? The blacksmith? Young Tommy from the Patterson Ranch? Cyrus Webb, who's got grandchildren waiting for him to come home? Morris's jaw worked, and Emma could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He was an honest man trying to do his duty, but he wasn't stupid. He could see the trap closing around him as clearly as Emma could. What are you suggesting? Morris asked carefully. I'm suggesting this warrant is garbage, and you know it, Emma replied. I'm suggesting Dalton used your reputation and your honesty to legitimize a murder dressed up as law enforcement. I'm suggesting that if you serve that warrant, you become complicit in everything Dalton's done. Those are serious accusations without proof. The proof is being delivered to the territorial governor and 3 major newspapers as we speak. Walt interjected. Give it 24 hours, Tom. That's all we're asking. 24 hours for the truth to come out. If we're lying, if the evidence doesn't support our claims, we'll surrender peacefully and face whatever consequences are appropriate. And if the evidence does support your claims? Morris asked. Then Dalton goes to prison, Fletcher and his men get arrested for attempted murder. And you get to sleep at night, knowing you didn't help execute an innocent woman and her children. Morris looked at Fletcher, at his posse, at the armed ranch hands surrounding them. He looked at Emma, dirty, exhausted, defiant, and at Sarah standing beside her mother with the same fierce courage. He looked at Walt Brennan, a man he'd trusted for 3 decades. Then he looked at the warrant in his hand. "Fletcher," Morris said slowly, "I'm going to need you to explain something to me. This warrant was issued yesterday afternoon, less than 24 hours after the Crawford place burned. How did Judge Harrington write such a detailed warrant so quickly? How did he know to include charges of harboring a fugitive when, by your own account, you didn't discover Mackenzie was at the Crawford ranch until the night of the fire?" Fletcher's expression flickered, just for a moment, but long enough for Emma to see the flash of uncertainty. He hadn't expected Morris to start analyzing the timeline. "The judge received information from confidential sources," Fletcher said. "What sources? From where?" "The Crawford Ranch is 40 miles from Prescott. Even if you sent a rider immediately after the attack, they couldn't have reached the judge, had a warrant drafted and signed, and gotten back to town before dawn. The timing doesn't work, Raymond." "Sheriff, you're overthinking this." "No," Morris interrupted, his voice hardening. "I'm thinking about it exactly as much as I should have from the beginning. This warrant is dated and signed 12 hours before you could have possibly provided the information it claims to be based on. Which means it was prepared in advance. Which means someone knew about the attack on the Crawford place before it happened." The pieces were falling into place behind Morris's eyes, and Emma could see the moment he understood. The warrant wasn't justice, it was premeditation. Dalton had prepared the paperwork before Fletcher ever rode out to attack Emma's home, anticipating either her death or her arrest, making sure every outcome served his purposes. "I think," Morris said carefully, his hand moving toward his gun, "that I need to have a long conversation with Judge Harrington about how he prepares his warrants." Fletcher's patience snapped. "You stupid, stubborn fool. You really think your honesty matters? You think procedure and law are going to protect you from what's coming?" His hand dropped toward his weapon. Time seemed to slow. Emma saw Fletcher's draw beginning, saw Morris reaching for his own gun, saw Walt's ranch hands raising rifles. She saw Sarah beside her, too close to the danger, too exposed, and she saw Fletcher's gaze fix on her with murderous intent. If he was going down, he'd take his primary target with him. Emma's hand found the pistol at her belt, Walt's spare weapon, loaded and ready. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't do anything but react with the instinct of a mother protecting her child. The gun bucked in her hand. Fletcher's weapon cleared his holster, but his aim went wide as Emma's bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him sideways. His shot went wild, whining off stones somewhere behind the house. Then everyone was shooting. The morning erupted into chaos, gunfire echoing off the ranch house. Men shouting orders, horses screaming and rearing. Morris's posse scattered, diving for cover, most of them unwilling to shoot at their neighbors. Fletcher's men returned fire with professional efficiency, targeting the ranch hands who dared to oppose them. Emma grabbed Sarah and yanked her behind a water trough as bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing. Cole fired from the porch, his shots measured despite the pain he must be feeling. Walt and his men fought with the grim determination of people defending their home, and Sheriff Morris honest, duty-bound Tom Morris made his choice. He aimed his weapon not at Emma or Walt, but at Fletcher's men, and opened fire. "Hold position," Morris shouted to his posse. "These are Dalton's men, not lawmen. Protect the civilians." The battle shifted. What had been an overwhelming assault became a confused melee as Fletcher's hired guns found themselves surrounded by angry ranchers and a sheriff who'd finally understood which side of history he wanted to be on. Fletcher, clutching his bleeding shoulder, screamed orders to his men. "Kill them all. No witnesses. Burn this place like we burned Crawford's." But his men were already retreating, recognizing a losing fight when they saw one. 2 were down, another wounded. The rest broke and ran for their horses. More interested in survival than Dalton's money. Fletcher himself tried to mount his horse one-handed, rage and pain contorting his features. But his wounded arm wouldn't cooperate, and he stumbled. Cole appeared beside him, revolver pointed at Fletcher's head. "Don't move. It's over." "It's never over." Fletcher spat blood. "You think stopping me stops Dalton? He's got 50 more just like me. 100. He owns this territory." "Not anymore," Cole replied. "By tonight, every newspaper from here to California will know exactly what he is. His empire is finished." Morris approached, deputies flanking him, and removed Fletcher's weapons. "Raymond Fletcher, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges I'll think up while we ride back to town." Fletcher laughed a bitter, broken sound. "You're arresting me? On whose authority? Dalton owns the judge, owns half the territorial officials. You think this changes anything?" "It changes everything," Emma said, standing up from behind the water trough. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "Because people know now. The truth is out there, spreading faster than you can stop it. And once people know what Dalton is, once they understand how many families he's destroyed, all his bought judges and corrupt officials won't save him." Morris looked at Emma with newfound respect. "I apologize, Mrs. Crawford. I almost made a terrible mistake." "You figured it out in time," Emma replied. "That's what matters." As the sun climbed higher, as ranch hands tended to the wounded and Morris's men secured the prisoners, Emma felt Sarah lean against her side. She wrapped her arm around her daughter, holding tight. They'd survived. Again, against impossible odds, they'd survived. But more than that, they'd won. The truth was out there now, carried by 12 riders in 12 directions, unstoppable and devastating. Victor Dalton's empire was crumbling. And Emma Crawford had been the spark that lit the fire. 3 weeks later, Emma stood on a hill overlooking what remained of her property, watching workers rebuild the house that had burned to the ground. The territorial governor himself had authorized the construction funds, part of his public apology to the families Dalton had victimized. The scandal had exploded exactly as Walt predicted. Within 48 hours of the riders departing, newspapers across 3 territories were running front-page stories about Victor Dalton's systematic land fraud. The evidence Cole had gathered proved irrefutable forged documents, falsified foreclosures, bribed officials, and at least 8 deaths that could now be investigated as murders rather than accidents. Dalton had been arrested trying to flee to Mexico. Judge Harrington resigned in disgrace before he could be formally charged. Fletcher and his surviving men faced trial for attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. The territorial government had frozen all of Dalton's assets, pending investigation. And it appeared most of his fortune would go toward compensating his victims. "Looks like they're making good progress," Cole said. Walking up beside Emma, he moved easier now, his wounds healing cleanly thanks to Martha Brennan's dedicated nursing. He'd spent the past 3 weeks giving testimony to investigators, journalists, and prosecutors, anyone who would listen to the full scope of Dalton's crimes. "It's strange," Emma said. "I spent 3 years fighting to keep that house, and now that it's gone, I realize it was never really about the building. It was about having something of Thomas's left. Something that proved our life together was real." "And now?" Emma smiled. "Now I understand that what Thomas left me wasn't a house. It was strength, courage, the ability to stand up when everything tells you to fall down. That's what I've been protecting. That's what I'll pass on to Sarah and Jacob." As if summoned by her thoughts, her children appeared from the construction site, both covered in sawdust and grinning. Jacob carried a hammer almost as big as he was, while Sarah had wood shavings stuck in her hair. "Mr. Henderson says we can help with the framing tomorrow," Jacob announced excitedly. "He's teaching me how to measure proper." "And I've been keeping the accounts," Sarah added. "Making sure all the materials are tracked correctly. Mr. Henderson says I've got a head for numbers." Emma's heart swelled watching them, no longer the trophy. Frightened, half-starved children who dragged a dying stranger from the desert, but confident young people discovering their own capabilities. Sheriff Morris rode up the hill, dismounting with a folder tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Crawford, Mackenzie, got some news from Phoenix you'll want to hear." "Good news or bad?" Emma asked. "Depends on your perspective," Morris replied, handing her the folder. "That's the deed to your property clear title, no liens, no mortgages. The territorial government forgave your debt as part of the restitution package. You own this land free and clear now, plus they're compensating you for the house and livestock you lost." Emma stared at the document, barely comprehending. Free and clear. No more debts hanging over her head, no more threats of foreclosure, no more desperate calculations about whether they could afford food or medicine. "There's more," Morris continued. "The governor wants to meet with you next month. Something about a position on a new commission he's forming oversight of property disputes and foreclosure proceedings. He figures someone who lived through Dalton's scheme would know how to spot the warning signs in the future." "Me, on a government commission?" "You exposed the biggest fraud in territorial history," Cole pointed out. "Who better to help prevent it from happening again?" Morris nodded. "Territory needs people with integrity and experience. You've proven you've got both." He turned to Cole. "As for you, Mackenzie, there's talk of a pardon for any crimes you committed while working for Dalton, seeing as you turned state's evidence and risked your life to bring him down. Might even be a job offer coming from the territorial marshal's office." "Real marshal this time." Cole looked surprised. "I don't know if I'm cut out for law enforcement anymore." "Not after what I've seen. That's exactly why you'd be perfect for it," Emma said. "You know how corruption works from the inside. You know the signs, the systems criminals exploit. You could help prevent others from making the mistakes you made." Cole studied her face, and Emma saw something shift in his expression, hope replacing the guilt that had shadowed him since she'd first found him bleeding in her creek bed. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to stop running from what I was and start working toward what I could be." Walt and Martha Brennan arrived in their wagon, bringing supplies for the construction crew. Martha immediately swept Jacob into a hug, while Walt approached with his characteristic directness. 37 families were confirmed as Dalton's victims, he reported. Most of them lost property that can't be recovered, sold to innocent buyers who didn't know they were purchasing stolen land. But the compensation fund should help them start over, give them a fighting chance. 37 families, Emma repeated, the weight of it settling over her. All those people hurt, and nobody knew until Cole started digging. "That's how evil works," Martha said gently. "One victim at a time, isolated and alone, so nobody sees the pattern. But you changed that, Emma. You and Cole together, you made people see." Sarah approached, wiping her hands on her work pants. "Mama, Mr. Henderson wants to know what color you want for the shutters. He says we can do green like before, or try something new." Emma considered. The old house had green shutters because that's what Thomas chose when he built it. But this wasn't the old house, this was something new. Something she and her children were building together with their own hands and choices. "Blue," Emma decided. "Sky blue. Because every time we look at them, I want us to remember there's no ceiling on what we can accomplish." Sarah grinned. "Blue it is." As the afternoon wore on, as workers hammered and sawed, as friends and neighbors came by with food and encouragement, Emma found herself standing apart from the activity, watching the sun paint the desert in its evening colors. Cole joined her again, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough for conversation. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about the day Jacob found you," Emma replied. "How scared I was, how desperate. How every instinct told me. To leave you there because helping you would only make our impossible situation worse. But you didn't. No, I didn't. And it did make everything worse, just like I feared. We lost the house, nearly got killed, became wanted criminals. Everything I was trying to protect fell apart. I'm sorry. Don't be, Emma said, turning to face him. Because losing everything material taught me what actually matters. It taught Sarah and Jacob that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, despite being terrified. It showed them that sometimes the hardest choices are the most important ones. She gestured toward the construction site, toward her children working alongside skilled craftsmen, toward the community that had rallied to their defense. We didn't just survive, Cole. We built something better than what we had. Not just a house of purpose. Sarah wants to study law now, help families protect their property rights. Jacob talks about being a builder, creating homes that families can be proud of. They found their callings because of what we went through. And you? Cole asked. What did you find? Emma thought about that. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate widow with no options and no hope. Now she stood on land she owned free and clear, with opportunities she'd never imagined, with children who discovered their strength, with the respect of her community and officials in Phoenix seeking her counsel. I found out I'm stronger than I knew, she said simply. I found out that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of. And I found out that the measure of a person isn't what they have. It's what they do when they have nothing left but their choices. Cole smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes without shadow or guilt behind it. You're a remarkable woman, Emma Crawford. I'm a woman who saved a dying cowboy and got more than she bargained for, Emma corrected with a slight smile. But I'd do it again. Every single choice, every terrifying moment. Because this, she gestured at everything around them. This is what comes from refusing to look away when someone needs help. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around. The construction site, as Martha called everyone in for supper, as Jacob's laughter rang out, and Sarah argued passionately with a carpenter about proper joint techniques, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace, not the peace of safety or security, those were illusions anyway, she'd learned. But the peace of knowing she'd faced the worst the world could throw at her and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The house would be finished in another month. The commission work would start after that. Cole would likely take the marshal's position and move to Phoenix. Life would continue forward, bringing new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, standing on her land under a sky full of stars, surrounded by people who'd proven that community and courage could overcome corruption and cruelty, Emma Crawford allowed herself a moment of simple gratitude. She'd saved a dying cowboy, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.